And so welcome to our February IEA GLR Midday Cafe. We are thrilled that you're here. Our thoughts are with you if you're in the tundra. We know many of our friends across the United States and globally. Yeah, there's just a lot that we're dealing with. And so it's always good to come face to face in community around a tool that we love, that we believe is really transformational. So we're excited about today's guest. Want to share with you just a few announcements by way of events and ways you can connect with our Enneagram community. And so Clare and Scott Loughrige are going to be partnering with Doug and Adele Calhoun. They're co-authors of Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram, but they're doing a retreat coming up called the Shameless Enneagram Retreat Online. And it's March 16th. I'll drop a link here in the chat. It's just going to be fabulous. And so if you can come, like I said, check out the link there. Teresa McCloy, who's also one of our board members, is going to be offering a real life process retreat. It will be in person in April. It's a safe location, small. She lives in a rural community here in Illinois. And the tool of the Enneagram is incorporated in the process that she teaches. So if you're a life or leadership coach wanting to use the tool in the work that you do, it's a great space to learn together. And then we've got some credentialing and certification programs. And so coming up in March, we're really excited. And Catherine Grant is on our call today, but she and Dr. Jerry Wagner are offering the Enneagram Spectrum online training and certification. And you did hear that right. It's online. We're so thrilled. So part 1 and part 2, the spring session will start March 16th. So if it's something that's always been on your list, and you can't do it because of travel, now's the time. They're also offering summer sessions and some later things in the year as well, but I'll drop the link in the chat for that as well. And then in June, we are hopeful, fingers crossed, the Emotions of the Soul with Clare Loughrige will be in person and live online in June of 2021 in Marshall, Michigan. So both of those are accredited certifications that will move you forward in your Enneagram wisdom. So like I said, we're just delighted that you're here. We are going to be recording this to put on our YouTube channel. So just know that as you share and interact with our community today. So I want to introduce our board president and turn it over to Clare Loughrige.
Thanks, Erica. And if everyone could put themselves on mute until you ask a question, that would be super helpful for recording purposes. And do just want to say to John, I don't know if Danielle's here too, board members here in GLR who are, I think your power must have come back on. Is it true? In Texas, you guys lost power. Who would have ever thought Texas would lose power in the winter? And then all of us here in the frozen tundra, we're so used to it. We've got our mucklucks and our parkas on. So even if we lose power, we're warm enough. We can sleep in, the mucklucks and parkas. Well, before we begin with a meditation, I want to introduce Suzanne Dion. And I actually asked her if I could call her Suzanne. Is it Suzanne or Suzanne? Because friends of hers say different things. And of course, in her gracious way, Suzanne said.
Well, Suzanne is the French pronunciation, but Suzanne is just fine.
Right. Well, and when I met you a couple of years ago at the IEA Global Conference, you were carrying around this beautiful book that we're going to talk about today, that you and our beloved Dr. David Daniels wrote together after working together since 2005, which I just think it's a beautiful part of the story, and I'm sure you'll share a little bit of that with us. But Suzanne has had the pleasure of working with one of the kindest human beings that God ever dropped on the planet. And having said that, he's a head type. And so as a 6, this wonderful 6, brilliant researcher, doctor, teacher, also is one of the kindest heart 6s you've ever met. And now he graces the halls of heaven with that beautiful God-given energy. And so when I met Suzanne, I saw the book that she co-wrote, I thought to myself, what in the world must that have been like to be in relationship all of those years, posting articles and editing articles for Dr. Daniels. And we know that you are a rich, rich storehouse. And I said to Suzanne, I said, it reminds me of this beautiful David White poem, and that you have been gifted with sharing the voice of Dr. Daniels. So I'm just going to ask us all in this moment to take a posture of meditation or prayer, however you practice being present to this present moment, and allowing yourself to take some breaths and receive the gift of this space. And even as you're breathing, taking in the place you are seated, even at this moment. Being aware of the gifts of space and time and gravity and presence. That you are here. And you are breathing. And you are a collective of the many people who have graced your life. And even those who have been a challenge in your life. And as you are present to your own presence on this day, you're also holding with you a great cloud of witnesses. Those that have gone on before you, who have deposited gifts and treasures and helped you form. And so as you remember someone who has graced you, let's just follow the practice of the people from Heart Math and breathe them right into the center of your chest. Right into your heart region. And maybe you can't remember what they said, but you remember how they made you feel. And allow that person whose presence graced your life to come fully into your consciousness here and into your breathing, into the cells and tissues of this temple we call your body. And receive these words from David White in any way that feels appropriate for you. One day I will say the gift I once had has been taken, and the place I have made for myself belongs to another. And the words I have sung are being sung by the ones I would want. Then I will be ready for that voice and the still silence in which it arrives. And if my faith is good, then we'll meet again on the road, and we'll be thirsty and stop and laugh and drink together again from the deep well of things as they are. One day I will say the gift I once have had has been taken, and the place I have made for myself belongs to another. And the words I have sung are being sung by the ones I would want. And so take a few more intentional breaths and receive any gift from that poem that feels appropriate. And as you feel ready to come back to this collective of people, can bring your attention to the screen. And the reason that reading for me felt very appropriate is the words I have sung are being sung by the ones I would want. And I see Suzanne as being the person who's carrying Dr. Daniels to us through this beautiful work. If you haven't purchased it yet, the Enneagram, Relationships and Intimacy. And the beauty of this book is the heart of it, but it's also the neurobiology. It is also attachment theory. It is also the gift of the brain group. It has so much to offer us from science in the Enneagram that you might not even know as you're reading it that you're reading it from a head type. You're going to feel so much heart here. And having said that, we know that Suzanne is an Enneagram dominant in style 1. And so maybe we would say the gut triad, but so where is the heart? Oh, it's all over the pages. And so we welcome you today, Suzanne. We welcome you, and we want to receive the gift of your life, and maybe even a couple of minutes just on the history of your meeting Dr. David Daniels, and then your collaboration.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to share how this book came to be and my work with David. I actually met David working for Frankly Associates, which is an organization development firm in Santa Cruz. And David was brought in to work with CEOs alongside a man named Frank Lee, who is a great mentor of mine. And I knew nothing about the Enneagram at the time, but I was healing from a very traumatic divorce, which I came to learn later was someone who had been severely traumatized in childhood. Well, I'll get to that later and how that influences everything. But David would work with CEOs, and you're not supposed to be touchy-feely in these environments, but David stood in front of, it was about 15 Fortune 100 company leaders. And he had tears in his eyes, and he said, studying this map, this system is going to change your level of compassion for other human beings. And he literally was tearful. And I was like, what is this? And this man touched me so deeply. And after that, I went and did the intensive in North Carolina. And I went on to certify only for my own personal growth and healing. At that time, I had no intention of becoming a teacher. It really was to heal my own traumatic experiences through divorce and some things I needed to learn about myself and recover from childhood. And when I found the Enneagram, it was instant truth to me. And talking to Denise Daniels, David's daughter, who's got a PhD in temperament and a lot of science. And she said, the Enneagram continues to be replicable because it's objective truth. We can see it in front of us. We can see the type in our family. We can see the different personality energies in ourselves and in others. And that's what makes it so valid. And that's the experience I had of it when I first was introduced to it. So fast forward to getting certified, and then being so taken by the system and David's teaching of it. As we all know who knew David Daniels, he is a professor emeritus of Stanford University, and went in to be a medical doctor, but found his leanings were with people and psychology, and he went on to be a psychiatrist, and then he had a private practice for 40 years, working primarily with couples, as it turns out. He was enamored by and sensitive to and drawn to human relationships. and relating to one another, he felt was the most important thing to sustaining our lives. And he was tremendously interested in caring of attachment, studied attachment theory, got into the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, who wrote the foreword on our book, who I've studied extensively. And, you know, with this approach to the Enneagram, David brought tremendous heart to what we would call panels in the narrative tradition, where David would be a master facilitator of panels, and he would just have such a way of bringing out the deep sensitivities and expression of the people that he was interviewing on Enneagram panels, where people are speaking for themselves and speaking of their type structure. Well, long story short, I started working with David in his organization, and we started on the Love Conference in 2008. And David saw and was very sensitive to the amount of suffering that happens in relationship with one another. And this is something he wanted to bring. He wanted to make a difference. He wanted to see less suffering and far more intimacy, far more vulnerability, and far more success in love. When our love life is going well, when our relationships are solid, when we have the support that we need in our lives are much more fulfilling and much more satisfying and much more successful. And when our relationships are not going well, and there's a lot of discord and dysfunction, we really suffer. And this was his passion. So in around 2008, 9, he said, I've got to write a book about the Enneagram and relationships, and will you help me? Will you co-write it with me? And I said, David, I can't possibly co-write this with you, but I will help you in any way that I can. And this was, he always knew this was going to be his legacy work. And we worked on the book for 10 years, writing different drafts. He and I also played a large role in the Enneagram Prison Project with Susan Olesic and Rick Olesic, went into teach in prison together. You know, we've spent hours together working and teaching and talking. And in 2017, after a second open heart surgery, we weren't done with the book. We had just redrafted another idea. We had taken it to a couple of publishers, and every time we did, it was, can you make this the top 10 ways to fall in love? And David would be like, no, it's not what this book is about. Can you make it the top 10 ways people fall out of love? And so finally we decided to self-publish so that we could actually put the message out as was on David's heart and my own. And in 2017, he and I had lunch, and he said, you know, in case something happens to me, would you promise me that you'll finish this book and get it out into the world? And I said, oh my God, David, I promise, but David, you're fine. Nothing, we'll have plenty of time to finish the book. And unfortunately, he passed 2 weeks later. My process of actually pulling together all these different drafts and notes and conversations was a task that took me 2.5 years. And finally, the book is pretty much in ready form. So that's kind of the background of how this book came to be. David was in a 61-year-long marriage that was very successful and very loving. My love life has been nothing but tumultuous. So between the two of us, we have a lot to share about what makes relationships work and how the Enneagram plays a role in that. And but I'm very, very honored to have been given this task, this calling that feels like I fell into it out of complete luck, but truly it's some kind of providence. And I'm here today more than excited to continue to bring his work to the world in the way that he brought it, and touching on all the things he cared about so much regarding relationship, our development, and what inhibits our development and what inhibits our growth.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And I loved hearing about your work in the prison with David, and talking about loving lost children, loving murderers, that there was something so important in the work to bring it into prison, knowing that when we come out of childhood, as you name in the book, we're either contracted or potentiated.
Yes.
And so how does that work with regular people who are not in prison? Is it true of us as well?
Wow, what a great question. So, you know, we are all prisoners of childhood. To borrow that from Alice Miller. And what we saw in prison was this truth and reality tenfold. Those who are in prison are suffering terribly from the time they started in childhood all the way up to finding themselves incarcerated. I was stunned at what I learned by the beautiful souls that can't cope, can't navigate, have to find another way, are suffering severe levels of childhood trauma and distress. ADHD is prevalent in prison, little children who can't concentrate in school, who are acting out. And sadly, I think our educational system doesn't nurture teachers enough to understand childhood trauma. So children that show up in school young and are malfunctioning are punished rather than nurtured, rather than intervened with. But that was one of the greatest experience and life-changing experiences for me, is working in the prison system, working alongside Susan Olesic and her husband. Susan is a very brave and courageous girl who started the Enneagram Prison Project. And I was with her on the ground floor of this process. And I was like, I'll do all the marketing and the writing and everything, and you just keep going in there. And finally, one day she said, we landed a big contract. She says, you've got to come in and start teaching. And I'm like, oh my God, I was absolutely terrified. But she was a great teacher for me. And the two of us ended up with each of us having maybe 150 or 200 students a week, 7 classes each a week. We were running as this program took off. And there is such a tremendous need to bring self-awareness, reparenting, re-nurturing into those who find themselves incarcerated. And I would say 75% of everyone in prison, and I was at San Quentin, San Mateo, Santa Clara County, are reachable, are healable, are starving for truth, are starving to be heard, are starving to understand what happened to them and how to have a better life. We all want a better life. We all want to have a satisfying life, as David would say. But those who find themselves incarcerated are dealing with circumstances and variables, and even brain function and injury and disorders of the self that inhibit their potential, inhibit normal function. So to bring the Enneagram in particular, and we were told, you can't bring that system into prison. You can't open people up in that environment. You can't allow them to have vulnerability. And in one view, that's true. There has to be very, very conscious work done in going into those environments. There has to be setting a very, very loving and protective field for everyone in the class. And there's lots of mechanisms that were built into our curriculum. But we saw the impact of the Enneagram on these individuals, and it was pretty fast, because this tool is like an accelerated entry point to yourself. As David used to tell me, it would take him 3-4 years to document a personality in private practice using his regular, psychological training. And he said once he got a hold of the Enneagram, it would take him 2 months. And then they could really accelerate the growth plan for someone, because he had the Enneagram, which is basically, if I may define it, is Enneagram pretty much points at our temperament. It points at our innate neural wiring, as Dan Siegel has called it, the developmental pathways of neural propensities, proclivities, and patterns. And Denise Daniels and Dan Siegel and the Brain Group are coming out with a book in another year or so. And it is identifying that the Enneagram is pointing directly at these particular neural proclivities that we have. It defines our temperament. And
yeah, and I'm so glad you went there, because I just recently, from someone who is very skeptical about the Enneagram, that is in a particular faith tradition, and so they're naming the Enneagram in some ways that are not actually very affirming. And one of the things that they say is that none of the psychologists they work with are giving this any credence. And I thought, oh, I'm going to ask Suzanne to tell us about the brain group. So about the brain group, these brilliant doctors.
So the brain group is comprised of Dr. Dan Siegel, who's the lead researcher. He's also a trained medical doctor down in UCLA. He's written several books, but he's known as the attachment theorist. And interpersonal neurobiology, meaning our brain is completely dependent on others and interactions with others for development. This is his work. Dr. Jack Killen, who's, we all know him in the Enneagram. He's been a very, very key contributor to the work of Jacques Pansep, who is the great neurobiologist, mammalian neurobiologist, who talks about mammalian emotions. In this book that David and I co-wrote, it's the first exposure of the mammalian emotional systems as tied to the 3 centers of intelligence, as tied to the Enneagram. The Enneagram fits directly on top of the same big 3 aversive mammalian emotions shared by humans and animals, meaning aversive, meaning the big emotions that keep us alive, that protect our instincts. Not protect our instincts, but protect our survival, meaning rage, terror, and panic and distress at the loss of connection. So anger, rage, fear, terror, distress, panic at the loss of connection. Rage, terror is the center of intelligence of the body types. Panic, distress, loss of connection, heart types. And fear, terror are the head types. So these 3 centers of intelligence are sitting on the 3 big aversive, they feel awful emotional systems that keep us alive, the big alert systems. So this is something the brain group has been working on for quite a while and has made this correlation, which I think is extraordinary, because this is our neurobiological wiring for survival.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So Dan Siegel, Jack Killen, Dr. Laura Baker, who is got a PhD in genetic science and the genetics of personality. And then Denise Daniels, Dr. Daniels' daughter, has a PhD in temperament. And she started to actually see the Enneagram's wiring to our temperamental disposition. So I'll give you an example of why this is so important. Long time ago in the Enneagram, they used to say, how did your childhood make you your Enneagram type? We now don't ask that question anymore, because that's not really how it works. What's really happening, and if you think about yourself as a young child when you got angry, you are not consciously choosing how you're going to react. And I'll use myself as an example. I have a girlfriend who's very expressive. When somebody faulted her or she got upset, she would tell them right away. She'd be very confrontive. She was very expressive. She could speak and she could really stand up for herself. And it was outward. I just go, wow. I'd look at her with such admiration, because since I was very young, if I was violated or I got upset, literally it was like a clamp. It was just like I would just feel this lockdown, throat, everything gone. And I would just be immobile. It's kind of a freeze response. And I would be readjusting what's appropriate. Can I be mad right now? Can I not be mad right now? I'm going through all these gyrates to just literally, I realize I'm censoring. This has been happening since I was very, very young. My body chose, my central nervous system chooses for me the solution under threat, how I'm going to respond under stress. And of course, there's adaptations involved. We adapt to save our attachment relationships, but the adaptations I choose are strengths wired in me. The way my central nervous system is wired has everything to do with what Enneagram type I find myself in later. Has everything to do with how I respond to stress and threat to survive physically, but to survive emotionally. I protect my physical self, and we're also protecting the sense of self. The development of the ego protects the sense of self. And how I'm going to do that is going to be based on the strengths and gifts I have within. I have a strength to brace myself and clamp and lock down. I go rigid, and my whole body just goes whoop. And That's how I defend. It's like a bracing. Type 1s brace themselves against reality. So this neurobiology is such a critical piece of what's coming in the Enneagram and the future study of it. Thanks to the brain group.
Yeah, and of course, when we talk about interpersonal neurobiology and the social synapses between us, right? And so when you go, if you could go around the circle in just 5 minutes and say what each Enneagram style brings to a relationship and what they in this social synapse between these two wonderfully made human beings, and maybe just that, because I want to give time for folks to ask you questions. But right around the circle, what do we bring in social synapses? What are we bringing to the other around the circle?
So I'll set a foundation for this by just talking about love for a second. And David would say, love is all there is. And I've heard that by many spiritual teachers. David came up with and created something called the basic proposition. It's the core belief of each Enneagram type. And when you distill this core belief down, and this is chapter 10 of the book, by the way, you get down to what I've come to organize as my way of ensuring that I'm loved in this world. All 9 types have got an agreement with the self, a core belief, a basic proposition of what I'm going to need to ensure that I'm loved in this world and that I'll have a satisfying life, and what I absolutely have to avoid in myself, who I cannot be. We call it the trap, is the conditional love of self, that basic proposition. And then we call what I have to avoid, who I cannot be, the avoidance. So in this setting up of conditional love, each type loves itself when it behaves according to its core belief. And we get very unaccepting and self-punishing when we don't behave according to that core belief. So as a type 1, I've got to be right. I've got to be integral. I've got to be responsible. I've got to be dutiful. I can't slough off. I can't be lazy. I can't take the easy road out. Now, when I follow these basic propositions, the things I've set up for myself, my conditional love of self, I'm kind of okay. I'm well managed, and my ego state is well managed. When I fall off of this, I'm not okay. So the same conditional love we bring to ourselves in the Enneagram is so easy to see by studying the basic propositions. We actually tend to love others conditionally as well. So one of the key things to start looking at is how I love myself conditionally and how I love another conditionally. This is one of the big ways we take ourselves out of love right away and what impacts our relationships. So now I'll go around and just talk about what each of the 9 types brings to relationships and intimacy. The book, actually, chapter 14, is all about sexual intimacy by the 9 types, which David really wanted to touch on with the Enneagram, even though some people said, you can't talk about that with the Enneagram, David. And he says, no, but it's so important, because how we relate vulnerably and intimately with one another has a great deal to do with our level of fulfillment in this world. Being received and receiving others sounds really easy, but it's actually a very complex process. Not very easy at all, but very beautiful. So I'll start with the body types. I'll start with 8, 9, and 1. So type 8s bring exuberance. They bring a lust for life. They bring a, yeah, let's go. They bring a lot of protection. So partners of 8 feel very protective. They feel very held. They feel they can lean back and the 8 is going to be there. As a diminishment, and we call these enhancements and diminishments, the diminishment, 8s can overpower their partners, can be very demanding, can insist on intensity, and partners can feel pushed to respond at times they might not want to respond, or they might not want to interact. Moving to type 9. Great gift of type 9 in relationship is this capacity to merge. Type 9 has a talent to non-differentiate itself from its partner. And it's that feeling of when you're an infant and you're not differentiated from your mother. You're completely merged. It's high levels of attunement. Nines have this tremendous gift to attune, line up with you and resonate. And when it can allow us to feel very received and very meant.
Hold on there. Hold on, Suzanne. Did you hear that, sweetheart? You're a wonderful 9. Great attunement.
And so the partner of 9s can just feel completely met, and 9s are masters at avoiding conflict and not bringing conflict to the relationship. On the diminishment side of this, 9s can hide their true selves in the alignment and attunement with others, and 9s don't push others. Sometimes in relationship, being pushed provokes our growth. We get challenged by the other showing up in their full self. 9s, because they will avoid conflict, they won't bring the intensity. They oftentimes won't initiate sexual interaction. They'll more wait to be received or wait for the word go. So that's where they want to, that's where their growth area is in relationship, intimacy. In type 1, so type 1s bring idealism, bring perfectionism. They want they want the most perfect romantic night, and the sheets are all clean and you're shaved and you've done everything you're supposed to do, right? And they really care. You know, Susan Olesic used to say, you can never be upset with a 1 for not caring, because 1s really care. Things are, that fire from that anger that's not necessarily expressed comes out in lots of other ways, but it comes out in wanting things so good and so right and so perfect. Bring a lot of integrity, a lot of stability and consistency to a relationship, highly reliable. When a 1 says, I love you, it means lots of things, and those things are adhered to, and they're consistent, and they're stabilizing. On the flip side, 1's diminishments in relationship can bring a criticalness. We are improvement junkies. We want to fix our partners. Not everybody wants to be fixed. And 1s can leave their partners feeling like they need to be a little different, and they can never quite hit the mark. And we don't realize we're doing that because we think that everybody wants to improve. You know, 1s can say, oh yeah, that was really great, but maybe next time, and maybe you could try this next time, because we offer improvement advice all the time as a form of love and interaction. So 2s, 3s, and 4s moving into the heart. Heart-based, heart-centered individuals are other-oriented for the most part. So my energy is me because of how you're responding to me. So starting with type 2, which is the carer or the giver, type 2s are oriented to the other's needs, the other's emotional state, the other's mood, the other's comfort. So the energy is going out and it's moving toward the other, and others can feel completely nurtured, cared for, loved, you're cooked for, you're touched, you're held, and 2s are moving toward you. As a diminishment, 2s forget to include themselves. Their needs are often unmet. They're so focused on the other, they don't realize that they're building up a resentment for not being appreciated, that they are feeling not in the relationship. The relationship is all about the other. They've made it all about the other subconsciously, and because it is a gift and a talent of 2s to go toward others, but the resentment can build, and that can cause 2s to want to withdraw. In the sexual experiencing, often 2s are so focused on the other that they're not actually in the experience as much for themselves, and they can feel left out. And this, of course, all gets repressed and held for long periods of time. And then that, again, resentment can be an issue here. In type 3, type 3s are in the heart center and are highly susceptible to the impression they're making on another, because threes can actually, this is a talent again, it's a gift, build an image of self and offer up that image as me. And threes can often put the image in the relationship instead of the whole authentic self. And threes will present what the other partner, what they believe the other partner wants them to be. Now you can imagine how this can cause trouble later on. Deep down, threes can feel very empty inside and not loved for who they really are. And that can start to, would you love me if I weren't? Would you love me if I wasn't successful? Would you love me if I wasn't how I presented myself? So this is working in the subconscious, but they've only presented the image. So allowing themselves to actually really show up as themselves, vulnerable and afraid, or afraid of not being enough for their partner. That's one of their challenges. Threes can often get caught in the doing of relationship. So they kind of check it off on their list. Oh, gotta spend time, gotta talk, gotta do the massage. And so they can lose contact with the joy of it because they're, meeting the checklist of tasks, and relationships can sometimes get caught in that. Type 4 is more, it's the ambivalent heart type. It's the heart type that moves toward others, and then it's a heart type that withdraws into the self. It's a heart type that tunes into others, and then it's a heart type that wants others to tune into itself. Type 4s are idealists. They're searching for the one beloved, and this beloved can be fantasized in a very great way. In the enrichments, in the enhancements that they bring, is this idealistic, romantic, poetic depth pursuing. I want to know you. I want to understand you. I want to know everything about you. And I want you to know everything about me. And it's very intimate and it's very intense. In the diminishments, 4s can suffer disappointment. So with the great idealism comes, it could be this way, it should have been that way, and it wasn't. So your partner shows up at the door and he's so excited to see you. And then after you go, well, he didn't bring any flowers. And so the 4 will take themselves out of the joy and out of the fulfillment because it immediately creates what could have been there and wasn't. 4s have this really interesting connection to disappointment, and disappointment can almost cause a suffering that makes the 4 long for more, and takes the 4 out of the acceptance and gratitude of what really is. So they're constantly longing for something else. So you can imagine that this makes it very hard in relationship for the partner to feel like they're enough. The partner can constantly feel like they're disappointing the 4. And so that can be very hard in the relationship. And now moving to the head types, 5, 6, and 7. The head types are future junkies in a way, anticipation, preparedness. What could go wrong? What do I need to do to prepare? How can I get out of the present moment and go someplace over there where it's going to be much more stimulating and much better? Or how can I be up in my head ruminating and figuring things out and postulating? So of course the head types are lived in the mental faculties quite a bit. Type 5s in relationship, what they bring to relationship is privacy, sacredness. What's shared between you and I stays between you and I. They want that private other. They want that private world together. And in relationship, they can be very intense, can be very pinpointed and narrowly focused on the partner in a restrained amount of time. So 5s can be all in, intense, sacred, and then need to pull away and recover. And this is something that is very hard in relationships to understand about 5s. 5s can get very exhausted in relationship. They have a temperament style that is, they have a low threshold for stimulus. They get overstimulated easy. The central nervous system is very sensitive. So lots of demands on emotion. How do you feel? How do you feel? And tell me more and tell me more. They can kind of feel intruded upon. They want to pull back. And oftentimes when in relationships with 5, we just have to realize that they're going to need their private time, and it is not a form of rejection. So you can imagine with certain personality types that might be harder, or with certain levels of early childhood trauma or attachment difficulties, a relationship with 5 could trigger loneliness or feeling unwanted. Type 6, the enhancements they bring: loyalty, devotion, continuity, persistence, preparedness. They're so worried about everything else that can happen, they tend to take care of a lot of things. They're very protected when we're with a 6, because they're handling stuff. They're over processing, over handling, over worrying about it, but they're taking care of us. They're the great we mind, and there's a very me and you in this relationship. And often 6s can be very selfless. They also can bring strength and beauty. 6s are both phobic and counterphobic. And these two styles are really interesting. I've never met a 6 who didn't have a mix of both, although they can lean a little more phobic or more counterphobic. But they bring a strength and a fortitude, even though they might be terrified inside. And they do a good job at trying to bring that security to the relationship. On the diminishing side, 6s worry a lot. They fret a lot. The mind can get very preoccupied. They can get, their minds can get dispersed on many things. And so feeling like you're the center of attention oftentimes can't happen, because their worry gets in the way. Their needing to prepare and rehearse gets in the way. And their doubt. Their doubting that you love them can get in the way. And in any 6 I've ever talked to in a love relationship, they really doubt if their partner really loves them. They doubt that they are really safe with the partner. They worry about betrayal, and they wonder if they're getting taken advantage of. And this is always kind of coming up, and that always needs to be massaged. In type 7, enhancements, boy, a lot of fun. A lot of stimulus. This is a temperament that is highly sensitive to new stimuli. This is a person who has a very high seeking instinct, meaning it has an aptitude for going out and getting multiple things, exciting things, doing things, finding things, finding the greatest mountain to climb and the greatest path to walk, and let's do this and let's do that. So life is very, very stimulating. Life is very active. They bring a lot of variety. They bring a lot of excitement and curiosity and stimulation. Never a dull moment with a 7. On the diminishing side, their need for variety can keep them from commitment. 7s report having a hard time locking themselves into just having one partner, because who I am with this partner is different than who I could be with him, or who I might feel with her. And so it gets hard for them to settle down in relationship. They do spend a lot of time in fantasy in relationship. And so even in their sexual experiences, they might not even be with the partner. They may be up in their head fantasizing about something else. That's been hard for them to learn to come down in the body and be with who they're with, not having to add to it or add more variety or leave and escape mentally into some other place while they're with you. So that's a quick summary of the 9 types in relationship. And you'll notice in a lot of these cases, the very gift we have within us is what ends up the liability, right? And we see that in all aspects of studying the Enneagram.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly does work that way when we're relating to one another.
It certainly does. I didn't see myself in anything that you just said. Nothing there at all. I wonder, we have just a few minutes left, and if anyone had a question, if you could just let Erica know, chat, put your name in behind the wall there, and she can unmute you. I do want to say, I'm glad you went to chapter 11. I'm also, I want to say chapter 8 is so important. It is an important chapter. And those of you who have, wondered about gender and masculine and feminine energies, this is a brilliant chapter. And you and I started talking about this the other day, Suzanne, about even children who are identifying in ways that are concerning for their physical health right now and their psychological health.
Yes.
And so we don't have time to unpack this, but I want to say, I feel like chapter 8 is so important, and I'm so glad the conversation started in chapter 8 before Dr. Daniels took his kind, brilliant soul from this, this planet to heaven. And because I do know that I am so concerned for children in this very confused world. And the way that you named the difference between gender and masculine and feminine energies and biological constructs, all of this is really important work for all of us, any of us in helping professions, to get into chapter 8 here and do some wondering and be present in a way that can help our world heal. And do you have one line or two to say about that?
Yeah. So to summarize, when as I'm born female, and in my society, there's XYZ expected of women. And if you tend to fit into the norm of what your society expects from your gender, a type 2 female fits just nicely. Type 4 females also fit the stereotypical norms of our society of how a woman should be. A type 8 female does not. And type 8 females can suffer a lot of aggression and difficulty, and I shouldn't be that way, and I shouldn't be so outspoken, I shouldn't be so dominant. And so when we don't fit the gender norm of our society energetically, we can really suffer either non-acceptance, all the way to shame, all the way to feeling I was born in the wrong body. And this is really heartbreaking. Nature is it's a beautiful perfection. And instead of having to change my body to fit my cognitive emotional constructs, maybe using the Enneagram, we can understand that a type 4 male is going to have a lot of emotion and sensitivity, and the type 8 female is going to have a lot of assertion, and both are perfectly right and fine, just as they are. And we don't have to change them, and we don't have to shame them anymore.
Yeah, and even naming that the freedom to stay in this body anatomically and live out of another energy, right, is so important. And it's a much longer conversation, but I wanted to pique your interest a little bit, everyone, because we had some conversations around things that we're concerned for our children, that they may think they need to do something surgically to change their physical construct in order to be loved, to experience what is so important that you name in the book, self-intimacy, before we can bring intimacy to the other.
Yes.
And so understanding that masculine and feminine energies are very different than our biological selves.
That's right. We've come a long way since the men are on Mars and women are from Venus, where we were split, personalities were split into two genders. And that actually isn't how it works.
Whoo, yep, you're turning the heat up a little bit there, Suzanne. And it's so good. I feel like you've given us just a glimpse, of course, into the tome, and And I appreciate that Rachel is saying, thanks for letting us know it's in chapter 8. I want to get the book and I want to read that chapter. And Shauna's saying, interest peaked definitely, especially the compassion with which the summary was provided. So needed. Guess I am buying the new book. The title of the book is The Enneagram, Relationships and Intimacy. And Erica will put the link right in the chat. And of course, this will be on YouTube. You can go back and watch this and rewatch it. And just know that there's a lot to chew on here. And Suzanne, you've given us a great gift today in your presence, in the collective that you hold right here in your own human person of having studied under this kind, brilliant scientist and friend. And so we do bless you, and we do expect that this work will do a lot of good in bringing healing in our world. And I also wanted to recommend The Mindful Therapist by Dr. Dan Siegel, even in your talking about interpersonal neurobiology. So that's a book.
Yes.
Dan Siegel, who did the foreword here, is also talking a lot about the Enneagram these days, which is delightful.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And he writes about the Enneagram in The Mindful Therapist. It's the first introduction of it from his perspective, and the identifiable neural propensities that organize type. The type is not just a concept. It's actually wired into our bodies. From the moment we are born and meet our parents, we're ready to respond with a central nervous system that is already wired in a particular way with certain proclivities. And this is his work. He and David were working on it. It's pretty profound.
Yeah, and the neural networks head, heart, and gut.
That's right.
We're not just talking about the organ of the brain. We're talking about head, heart, and gut, and the neural pathways and the messages that are sent up from our body and up from the heart region. And so we, all of us, with all three centers of intelligence, can come, into harmony. We won't talk about that, but I have to tell you, as someone who teaches the harmony triads, love the little bit of harmony you gave us in this book as well. And so it's just rich and dense and loving, and it will be something you can put on the shelf and keep pulling down in years to come. So thank you, Suzanne, and everyone all together, just take a breath here and know that it was a lot and things might have gotten kicked up, and wonderings about your own life or the life of someone you love or the life of someone who has been a source of pain for you. So just take a breath and know that you are okay right now. And that this time together with Suzanne has just given us a little gateway to peek in and to see what we might be ready to bear individually. In my faith tradition, we look to Jesus, who said, I will reveal all things to you when you're able to bear them. And I feel so grateful that wherever you are today, you don't have to bear what you can't bear at the moment. So just take a breath. And know that there will be time and space to do the work in your own self-intimacy and then in intimacy with others as you stay open and receptive to the work that is grounded in love. And again, in my faith tradition, we're facing into 40 days of letting go. And letting go of things that no longer serve our ability to become. As Kierkegaard said, with God's help, I shall become myself. And we're also opening up to ways to receive life, new life, ways to receive. All that can bring the kind of life for the self and the world. And so I just invite you to breathe and consider, if you're under snow, that there's all kinds of seed that will be popping up in the very near future. And however barren or cold or desolate, if you feel like you're in a season of winter, spring will come and life will come. So thank you all for joining us. We will post this wonderful time with Suzanne on the Enneagram Great Lakes page. And I will put a link to the poem. Someone asked for the link to David White's poem as well, the piece that we opened up with. And be sure to stay connected with us. Let us know on the Facebook page if you'd like us to include you in our newsletter. And may you all go out into this wild world with a greater sense of love because of this day. Bye, everyone.